44. That is the number that just rewrote the history of women's basketball. Every single Indiana Fever game in the 2026 season, all 44 of them, will broadcast on national television. Not a record approached, not a record tied. A record that has never existed in the entire history of this league. Not for any franchise, not even close. And the moment you understand what it actually costs for 7 of America's most powerful media companies to commit that level of airtime simultaneously to a single team, you begin to understand why every argument about who actually drives this sport forward just ended. Music. Disney committed 13 games on ABC and 17 more on ESPN, Amazon, NBC Universal stepped up, and ION is in. Paramount Plus are in. That is not a collection of organizations taking a flyer on a trendy product. Those are billion-dollar operations that answer to shareholders, advertising partners, and quarterly earnings calls. And every single one of them ran the same analysis on the same rosters, the same ratings data, the same venue information, and landed on the same conclusion at the same time. Indiana is the product the market wants. And when entities that large all reach identical conclusions simultaneously, that is not coincidence. That is a verdict. If you have been watching this power shift develop, the ratings, the venue sellouts, the sponsorship numbers, hit that like button right now. Hit that like button right now. We are going deeper than any broadcast summary can take you, and you will want the algorithm to know you were here for this one. To appreciate the full weight of what 44 nationally televised games represent, you have to hold the before picture next to the after picture long enough for both to fully register. Before Caitlin Clark arrived in Indianapolis, the Indiana Fever were a franchise existing quietly at the margins of the WNBA's visibility. They were missing the playoffs with regularity, drawing modest attendance into a building technically capable of holding over 17,000 people, but rarely given reason to test that capacity. The Fever were a team with a history and a market and an arena that dwarfed most of the league's venues, but none of those structural advantages were producing anything the sports media industry needed to buy. Clark arrived in 2024, and the transformation was immediate enough that even skeptics had to acknowledge the numbers. Fever games that would have been regional afterthoughts started pulling viewership figures that sat comfortably alongside the lower tier of the WNBA's regular season broadcast schedule on the same networks. That is not a claim about quality equivalence. Nobody is making that comparison. But the demographic that commands the absolute highest premium in the advertising marketplace, adults 18 to 34, was suddenly watching women's basketball in volumes that rewrote what a spreadsheet looked like for the people buying and selling those ad slots. Sponsors started calling unprompted. Media executives who had not thought seriously about the WNBA in years started paying very close attention. The Fever became, in the span of a single season, a product worth fighting over. The reason all 44 games became a viable package for every major media company is not simply that Caitlin Clark is a remarkable basketball player. The roster construction around her is what makes the product sellable at this scale. Aaliyah Boston operates in the post drawing double teams and still converting at a high rate because her footwork and her ability to read a collapsing defense are genuinely ahead of what most opponents are prepared to handle on a possession-by-possession basis. Kelsey Mitchell comes off screens and pulls up for mid-range jumpers that are extremely difficult to contest because she gets her feet set so quickly that a closeout barely has time to form before the ball is already released. Lexi Hull accepts the most difficult perimeter defensive assignment every single night without public complaint, which is the kind of work that changes outcomes without ever appearing in a highlight package, which is the kind of Sophie Cunningham steps off the bench and introduces a level of physicality that shifts the entire tactical tempo of a game, changing what the opposing bench can run in the fourth quarter when the game is on the line. What that combination means for opposing coaches is that loading the defense entirely toward Clark does not solve Indiana. The spacing is too precise, the supporting cast too capable of converting in the spaces that aggressive Clark coverage creates. Every Fever possession becomes a legitimate defensive problem, and that makes every game a genuinely compelling broadcast product, something a network executive can walk into an advertising sales meeting and present with complete confidence. You are not selling one player's personal highlight reel. You are selling a team that produces competitive, high-stakes basketball that audiences want to watch from tip-off to the final buzzer. And then there is the venue itself, which matters more to the economics of this than most people outside the industry realize. Gainbridge Fieldhouse was built for an NBA franchise, which means it was engineered to translate on a broadcast. 17,000 seats means 17,000 people generating crowd noise that hits microphones the right way and fills camera angles with energy rather than empty sections. The atmosphere that a packed NBA arena produces is not just an aesthetic detail. It is something advertisers actively pay for because the way a venue looks and sounds on television directly influences what a 30-second commercial slot around that broadcast commands in the open market. That premium is baked into every single Fever home game as a structural advantage, and it compounds across all 44 broadcasts. The market did not just answer one question when it handed Indiana the entire regular season slate. It answered the question of whether last season's ratings performance was sustainable or a novelty. It answered the question of whether sponsors were genuinely committed or just testing the waters. And most pointedly, it answered the question that one specific player has been asking publicly, loudly, and persistently for 2 years. A player who has insisted at every available microphone that she personally drives people to watch this sport. Do you think the broadcast schedule reflects the true state of this league right now, or is there something the money is missing? Tell us below, and let's keep going. Then the defending champion Las Vegas Aces at 33, led by Ja Wilson, a player who has already collected a league MVP award and who has demonstrated over multiple seasons exactly the kind of franchise-level impact that networks price accordingly. Then the Los Angeles Sparks at 31. Now pause on the Dallas number because it requires a specific kind of attention. The Wings received 36 nationally televised games for 2 players who, at the time networks were writing those contracts, had not played a single professional minute together. Not one game, no proven chemistry, no track record as a partnership, no established identity as a duo at this level. Walker and Fudd were being purchased entirely on projection, on the story of what they might become when they share the floor. And networks still looked at that projection and decided it was worth more committed airtime than Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream with an actual season of professional basketball already behind them. That is not a subtle signal. That is the industry communicating something direct and specific about where genuine confidence lives in 2026 and where it does not. The arithmetic between 44 and 28 is 16 games, which represents nearly a third of a complete WNBA regular season. For 2 full years, Reese maintained at every available platform that she was a driving force behind women's basketball's growth. That her name, her presence, her personality moved the needle on something structural and important about the league's trajectory. The 2026 broadcast schedule subjected that claim to a real money market test with network executives, advertising partners, and ratings analysts all in the room. Atlanta came in 7th. That is the market's answer. The venue situation adds a financial dimension to the broadcast gap that the game count alone does not fully communicate. While Indiana operates out of Gainbridge Fieldhouse and Las Vegas fills Michelob Ultra Arena, both facilities designed and built for WNBA-level professional basketball. The Atlanta Dream currently plays their home games at the Gateway Center in College Park, Georgia, a building with a capacity of roughly 3,500 people. Broadcast production quality does not exist independently of where a game is played. Camera angles in a smaller building are tighter and less dynamic, registers differently through a microphone array. The energy differential is visible through a screen, and advertisers are buying that visible energy as much as they are buying the game itself. A spot in a nationally televised FIBA game and a spot in a nationally televised Dream game are not the same commercial product. They do not command the same rate. That revenue gap is structural. And it follows Atlanta into every home broadcast this season. Real quick, if this level of analysis is what keeps bringing you back to this channel, consider hitting that join button below. Your support is what makes it possible to keep going this deep on the stories the mainstream conversation keeps skimming past. And if this breakdown is changing how you see the broadcast rankings, share it with someone who thinks the schedule is just a scheduling detail. Those 28 games are not a scheduling detail. They are a market. Verdict: pass this along and let's finish the picture. Understanding how Atlanta arrived at this position requires looking honestly at what actually happened during Reese's 2 years with the Chicago Sky. Year 1, the team finished 13-27. Year 2, they declined further to 10-34. That is not a team navigating growing pains on the way to something better. That is a franchise losing more games every consecutive season a player is present, and the direction of that trajectory is not ambiguous. The rebounding totals during those seasons were genuine in terms of raw volume. She was pulling boards at a high rate, but when you examine the composition of those numbers closely, a significant portion came off her own missed attempts. Failed to convert at the rim, retrieve the offensive rebound, post the board. The counting stat increases while the efficiency numbers stay in the basement. There is an important distinction between a player whose productivity generates production. For her team and a player whose stat line self-generates production for her team and a player whose stat line self-generates through inefficiency. That distinction appeared in the win column consistently across 2 full seasons. The locker room environment in Chicago eventually reports surfaced describing friction between Reese and established veterans on the roster, with the most publicly discussed conflict involving Courtney Vandersloot, a player whose standing in the league gave the situation a weight that made it impossible to downplay. They do not reassign it at all. Then came the development that reframed the entire Chicago narrative in a single offseason. While Reese was in that locker room, the surrounding conversation league-wide was that the Sky had become a difficult free agent destination, a place where veterans were reluctant to go because of something about the situation that was widely understood but carefully not stated. Then Reese departed, and the free agency picture changed immediately and completely. Skylar Diggins-Smith signed with Chicago. As Ross Stevens came aboard, DeWanna and Carrington joined. A franchise that talented players were steering away from became a franchise talented players were actively choosing. The only variable that changed between those two realities was a single player's presence in that building. The market saw that transition. It factored into the calculation. Ryan Howard stated without hesitation that whenever Reese had been on the opposing side of the court, Howard felt like she was personally going to score 30 points. Delivered flatly, without softening, as though she was simply reporting something obvious. Every coaching staff in the league watching that clip received a free tactical instruction: root the ball handler. Howard is guarding toward Reese's defensive assignment, and collect the Reese's defensive assignment, and collect the Reese's as annoying as hell, a phrase that carries a charitable reading in the context of competitive basketball, suggesting toughness or persistence. It also carries a completely literal reading. When the line between those two interpretations is that thin and the delivery carries no warmth, the room tends to fill in the meaning on its own. Alicia Gray took a slightly different angle, offering that her best individual scoring performances over the past 2 years came specifically when she was playing against Chicago. Gray is one of the more capable offensive players in this league. When she identifies a particular Defense as the environment that brings out her best work. She is not paying that defense a compliment. She is identifying a vulnerability and nomming it publicly at a press conference intended to celebrate her new teammate. Here's what makes that press conference the most telling moment in this entire story. These three players offering casual observations. They are women who will share a locker room, a practice floor, a training staff, and 40 games of professional basketball with Reese every single day this season. The dynamic that Reese spent 2 years creating in Chicago. The public friction with veterans, the conduct suspension, the departures that followed her exit did not dissolve when she crossed state lines. It preceded her into the building. The veterans in Atlanta processed 2 seasons of watching her from the opposite side of the court, and their introductory press conference reflected exactly what that processing produced. The Indiana Fever with Clark secured a commitment from every major media company in America to broadcast every single one of their games, 44 in total, something the WNBA has never seen. 0 documented locker room friction. 0 conduct issues. A supporting cast that produced career-level seasons by playing alongside their star rather than around. The Atlanta Dream in their first season with Angel will operate out of a 3,500-seat venue, carry 28 national broadcasts into the season, and enter that season having already watched the veterans in their own locker room. Describe her defensive capabilities and her personality at a press conference designed to celebrate her arrival. No personal platform, no public quote, no social media following changes what networks decide to commit when spreadsheets are the deciding document. The only question that remains is whether Atlanta can build something in spite of the circumstances, and whether the environment inside that building will allow the attempt to begin. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do not miss what comes next. If the Atlanta season opens the way that press conference suggested it might, there is going to be a great deal more to unpack before the summer ends. Click on the next video on screen right now, and we will see you there.